Leader of the third party.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. There was some hope in the run-up to yesterday's forestry announcement that the Premier and Minister might belatedly wake up to what's happening in our forests and recognise the need to act. That they might finally show the leadership that is so desperately called for in this province. Instead, they peddled the same old misleading figures that have been widely and repeatedly debunked about how much old growth is left and what steps they've taken. They announced nothing to de-escalate the situation at Fairy Creek, no logging deferrals, nothing to support Indigenous communities and forest workers to transition to a sustainable future for this province, as opposed to continuing to liquidate what is left of the old growth forests in BC. To do what they did yesterday, to release some vague promises for down the line without any concrete actions to protect ancient forests today, essentially guarantees years of conflict in our forests. Years of people trying to protect these ecosystems, years of worsening divisions, and years where communities and workers are kept dependent on a fundamentally unsustainable resource until it runs out. My question is to the Premier. What does he say to the majority of British Columbians who want to see the last of BC's old growth protected, and to the people who voted for him with the belief that he would be true to his word?
Minister of Forest, Lands and Natural Resource Operations.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for the question. And what the member is insinuating is just inaccurate. We are working to protect additional areas on an ongoing basis, and what we announced yesterday will help us to do just that. In fact, we expect to be able to announce additional deferrals this summer. We are doing this work in partnership with First Nations and with respect for how they want to manage their lands. This is critical, and it was the key recommendation of the Old Growth Report. We were able to move really quickly to protect over 200,000 hectares of old growth in September because we did those important discussions, those critical government-to-government discussions with Indigenous nations. And we will continue to do that, and we will continue to add to deferrals with more to come this summer.
Leader of third party, supplemental.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. We have a responsibility in here to be honest and to completely recognize that we have to maintain the trust of people. And when the Minister and the Premier continually talk about 200,000 hectares being protected, they know that that is not accurate. They know what the scientists have said. They know what the truth is. The Union of BC Indian Chiefs has been very clear about what they need to see. That's immediate logging deferrals, critical funding for conservation financing, and Indigenous-led conservation initiatives. Grand Chief Stuart Phillip said that to have good faith conversations on forestry, we must put away the power saws. Instead, this government is creating more economic dependency on old growth logging in these communities and refusing to forge a pathway out. Yesterday, the Premier said it will be by 2023 before a new old growth plan is introduced. So in the meantime, we will continue to lose these irreplaceable forests because of his refusal to stop this liquidation. And this despite the fact that pausing the harvest while they come up with a long-term plan is exactly what the Old Growth Review Panel recommended and exactly what the Premier promised to do. And I expect there'll be an invoking of agreements. And let's just be clear, in their submission to the courts, Teal Jones indicated that they would make somewhere in the neighborhood of $20 million off the tree farm license in Fairy Creek, although others indicate that it might be 10 times that. And in the agreement that this province came to, the revenue sharing agreement, for the first year, $242,000 goes to Pachedat. So let's be clear whose interests are being protected here. My question, again, is to the Premier. How much more of the last old growth in this province can we expect to see logged before this new old growth plan comes into place?
Minister of Forest.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I do take exception that the member's suggestion that we are misrepresenting the facts, because the facts are very accurate. You know, we have deferred and protected 200,000 hectares of old growth throughout the province, and we expect to announce additional deferrals this summer. But what's critical, and what the member seems to be forgetting, is we all stood in this house. We all stood in this house 2 years ago, and we all unanimously accepted the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And we all said that we had to abide by that. And that is just what we are doing. We are reaching out to Indigenous nations. We are reaching out to those rights and title holders of whose land the old growth sits on. We are talking to them and talking to them about future deferrals. But we are doing it with respect, with understanding that it is up to the nations, working with the nations, in those government-to-government discussions, that we ensure that we are deferring land that is their land, that is their territory. And we are also bringing in other people. We are having those important discussions with Indigenous nations, but we were also bringing to the table the communities that are affected, the workers that are affected, the companies that are affected, but also the environmentalists who are expressing their concerns. We are bringing them to the table. We are working together. And as I have said, I can assure the member, we will be deferring more old growth, more of those ancient forests this summer.